Abraham Lincoln's death was more than just the loss of a president. It was the moment that forever changed the course of American history. On the night of April 14, 1865, an event occurred that would echo through the ages, leaving the nation in shock and altering its path. Lincoln, the president who had guided the country through its Civil War, was assassinated in cold blood while watching a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. The tragedy shocked the nation, but it also sparked questions that linger to this day. What would have happened if Lincoln had lived? Could he have completed his vision for a unified nation, or would his untimely death have changed the course of history forever? Stay with us as we dive deep into the details surrounding the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, the motives behind the attack, and the immediate aftermath that rocked a nation still in the process of healing from the Civil War. But first, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. It's always great to connect with viewers around the world. And if you enjoy this kind of historical content, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Abraham Lincoln's journey to the presidency is one of the most remarkable stories in American history. Born on February 12, 1809, in a log cabin in Kentucky, Lincoln came from humble beginnings. His family was poor, and he received little formal education, but his determination and self-discipline led him to become one of the most influential figures in the country. Lincoln's early life was marked by hard labor and a relentless thirst for knowledge. He was largely self-taught, spending countless hours reading books and studying law. By the 1830s, Lincoln had started to make a name for himself in the political scene of Illinois. He served in the state legislature and later in the U.S. House of Representatives. His rise to prominence, however, was fueled by his strong stance against the expansion of slavery into the Western territories. His debates with Stephen A. Douglas in 1858 during the Illinois Senate race brought him national attention. Although he lost the race, his articulate arguments against slavery and his firm belief in preserving the Union positioned him as a key figure in the Republican Party, which had recently formed. When Lincoln was elected president in 1860, the country was on the brink of division. The issue of slavery had divided the nation for decades, and his election triggered the secession of southern states. The outbreak of the Civil War soon followed, pitting the Union against the Confederacy in a brutal conflict that would last for 4 years. Throughout the war, Lincoln demonstrated leadership that would ultimately preserve the Union and lead to the abolition of slavery. His Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 declared that all slaves in Confederate-held territory were to be set free, making the fight against slavery central to the Union war effort. While Lincoln's leadership was critical to the Union's victory, his presidency was also marked by a deep commitment to reconciliation and healing the nation. He knew that the end of the war would not simply mean the defeat of the Confederacy, but that the healing process would be long and painful. He was already thinking about how to bring the nation back together, even as the war continued to rage on. This vision of a nation united and at peace was at the heart of Lincoln's legacy, and it's a vision that would tragically be cut short by his assassination. The night of the assassination. April 14, 1865 began as an ordinary day in Washington, D.C. The Civil War had officially ended just a few days earlier, with General Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. The country, exhausted from years of conflict, was beginning to heal. Abraham Lincoln, who had led the nation through its most trying period, was finally looking forward to a period of peace and reconstruction. However, what was to come that night would send shockwaves throughout the nation and change the course of history forever. That evening, Lincoln and his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, attended a performance of the comedy Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater, a popular venue in the heart of the city. The couple had planned the outing as a chance to relax after the wars. They were seated in the state box, a private area above the stage, and were joined by friends, including Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée, Clara Harris. The atmosphere was light-hearted and filled with laughter as the audience enjoyed the comedy unfolding on stage. However, the mood would soon shift dramatically. John Wilkes Booth, a well-known actor and Confederate sympathizer, had been plotting Lincoln's assassination for weeks. Booth was a passionate believer in the Southern cause, and he felt that the assassination of the president would avenge the South's defeat in the Civil War. Booth had originally planned to kidnap Lincoln and take him to the South, hoping to exchange him for Confederate prisoners. But the situation changed. With the South's surrender, Booth's plans evolved into a more violent mission: to kill Lincoln. At around 10:15 p.m., as the play reached its most critical moment, Booth slipped into the presidential box. Armed with a small Derringer pistol, he approached the unsuspecting president from behind. With a single shot, Booth fired the weapon, hitting Lincoln in the back of the head. The shot echoed through the theater, and chaos erupted. Lincoln slumped forward, his body lifeless, and Mary Todd Lincoln screamed in horror. Booth, with swift precision, made his exit from the box, leaping onto the stage and shouting, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants, a phrase associated with the assassination of tyrants before fleeing the scene. In the moments following the attack, the audience was paralyzed with shock and confusion. The president was immediately carried to a nearby boarding house, the Peterson House, where doctors worked frantically to save him. But it was clear that Lincoln's injuries were too severe. The nation's leader, the man who had steered the country through its darkest hour, was slipping away. The death of Lincoln, his last hours. Abraham Lincoln was carried to the Peterson House across the street from Ford's Theater, where he was placed on a bed in a small room. Doctors quickly gathered around him, assessing the severity of his wounds. The bullet had entered the back of Lincoln's head and caused severe damage. His condition was grave from the moment he was shot. His wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, rushed to his side, overwhelmed with shock and grief. She was joined by members of his cabinet and others who had been close to the president throughout his tenure. Despite the best efforts of the doctors, Lincoln remained unconscious, and there was little hope of his survival. The scene at the Peterson House was chaotic, with people flooding in and out of the room, many trying to comfort the First Lady and others praying for the president's recovery. The room grew silent as people waited in anguish for any sign of improvement, but it never came. As the night wore on, Lincoln's condition worsened. Around 7:22 a.m. on the morning of April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln passed away. The death of the president marked the end of an era for the United States. It was not just the loss of a political leader, but the loss of a man who had become a symbol of hope and unity for a fractured nation. When the news of Lincoln's death spread, it sent shockwaves across the country. The capital city, Washington, D.C., was plunged into mourning. Flags flew at half-mast, and people from all walks of life began to gather, expressing their grief in a collective outpouring of emotion. Lincoln had led the nation through its darkest period, and now, with the war over and victory in sight, he had been taken from them in the most violent and tragic manner imaginable. Around the world, leaders and citizens alike expressed their shock and sorrow at the loss. Foreign dignitaries sent their condolences, and the grief was not limited to the United States. Lincoln's death was felt globally as a tragedy, with many recognizing the impact of his leadership on the course of history. The hunt for John Wilkes Booth. Following the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, the nation's immediate focus shifted to capturing the man responsible. John Wilkes Booth, the assassin, had managed to escape the theater and flee the city. But his escape was not without consequence. His actions would ignite one of the largest manhunts in American history, as the nation's law enforcement and military worked tirelessly to track him down. Booth had planned the assassination meticulously, but his escape route was fraught with difficulties. After shooting Lincoln, he leapt from the presidential box to the stage below, breaking his leg in the process. Despite this injury, Booth continued with his escape, sprinting out of the theater and mounting a horse waiting for him outside. His goal was to flee to the South, where he believed he could find refuge. He headed for Maryland and then into Virginia, hoping to find sanctuary among Confederate sympathizers who would support his cause. Booth's initial escape was aided by a network of co-conspirators who had been involved in his plot. They had planned for him to travel through rural areas where he could remain undetected. However, as Booth made his way toward Virginia, the authorities were already on high alert. The news of Lincoln's assassination spread quickly, and the manhunt was launched immediately, with federal agents and Union soldiers combing through the region in search of the fugitive. The manhunt lasted for over 2 weeks, with Booth's movements traced across multiple states. On April 26, 1865, Booth was located at a farm in Virginia, near the town of Port Royal. His hiding place was surrounded by Union soldiers, and Booth was trapped. As the soldiers attempted to apprehend him, Booth refused to surrender. He was shot and killed by Sergeant Boston Corbett while still inside a barn, bringing an end to the search for the man who had taken the life of the president. Booth's death, however, did not bring closure to the nation. While his capture and death were celebrated by many, the psychological and emotional impact of Lincoln's assassination would linger for years. The loss of the president was a wound that would not heal easily, and the nation would have to find a way to move forward without the leadership of the man who had united them through the most challenging period in American history. Motives and consequences of the assassination. John Wilkes Booth's motives for assassinating Abraham Lincoln were deeply rooted in his beliefs and the turmoil of the time. Booth was a staunch Confederate sympathizer who believed that the South had been wronged by the outcome of the Civil War. The war, which had cost countless lives and destroyed much of the Southern economy, had left Booth feeling embittered and desperate. For him, Lincoln was the embodiment of the Union's victory, the end of slavery, and the suppression of the South's independence. His hatred for the president had festered for years, and Booth saw the assassination as an act of vengeance for the South, as well as an attempt to disrupt the post-war Reconstruction efforts. At first, Booth had intended to kidnap Lincoln. His original plan was to abduct the president and take him to the South, hoping to exchange Lincoln for Confederate prisoners. However, after the fall of the Confederacy and Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, Booth's plans shifted. The South had lost, and Booth believed that Lincoln's death would somehow restore the honor of the South and prevent the impending changes brought by Reconstruction. It was a deluded and tragic vision that led him down the path of murder. The consequences of Lincoln's assassination were immediate and profound. The loss of the president left the nation in a state of shock and grief. The immediate impact was felt most deeply in Washington, D.C., where the halls of power seemed frozen by the magnitude of the tragedy. The government had to rapidly adjust to the loss of the leader who had seen them through the war. Vice President Andrew Johnson was quickly sworn in as president, though his leadership was met with skepticism by many, particularly in the South. Johnson, who had been a staunch Unionist, lacked Lincoln's political skill and ability to unite the nation. In the short term, the assassination sparked a wave of anger and fear across the country. Many believed that Booth was not acting alone, and the authorities feared that there were other conspirators who might be targeting additional political figures. The government swiftly arrested and executed several individuals who had been involved in the plot to assassinate not only Lincoln, but also Vice President Johnson and Secretary of State William Seward. The conspirators' trial revealed a web of connections to pro-Southern sympathizers and individuals who felt that killing Lincoln would be a final blow to the Union's power. The assassination also had long-term political and social consequences. Lincoln's death at such a pivotal moment in American history left the nation vulnerable. Reconstruction, the process of rebuilding the South and integrating formerly enslaved people into society, became more difficult without Lincoln's guiding. And Johnson's administration struggled to implement the policies Lincoln had envisioned, and the tensions between the North and South only deepened. The assassination also served as a stark reminder of the deep divisions within the country, divisions that would take decades to overcome. Lincoln's assassination ultimately became a symbol of the violent political climate of the time, a reminder of how deeply polarized the nation had become. It also left the country mourning the loss of a president who had led them through the most significant crisis in their history. In the years that followed, Lincoln's legacy would continue to shape the nation's political landscape, even as the wounds caused by his death remained fresh in the collective memory of the American people. Legacy of Abraham Lincoln. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln marked a pivotal moment in American history. Though his life was tragically cut short, Lincoln's legacy endured, becoming one of the most significant and revered in the world. His leadership through the Civil War, his role in ending slavery, and his vision for a united nation after the war have cemented his place as one of the greatest presidents in U.S. history. In the wake of his death, his legacy began to take on a symbolic meaning far greater than his accomplishments alone. First and foremost, Lincoln is remembered for his leadership during the Civil War. He managed to keep the Union intact during its most perilous time, making difficult decisions that ultimately saved the United States from permanent division. His Emancipation Proclamation, which freed slaves in Confederate-held territories, not only altered the course of the war but also set a moral precedent for the country, shaping the future of civil rights in America. Though he did not live to see the full impact of this decision, it marked a turning point in the nation's history, moving it toward a more just and equal society. In the years after Lincoln's death, his image began to transcend the immediate aftermath of the Civil War. His speeches, especially the Gettysburg Address, became central to his legacy, embodying ideals of democracy, freedom, and equality that have continued to resonate throughout American history. The phrase "government of the people, by the people, for the people" from the Gettysburg Address is often cited as one of the most enduring expressions of democratic ideals. Lincoln's ability to articulate the values of the American system of government, even in the midst of the bloodiest conflict the country had ever faced, elevated him to the status of a national hero. The vision of post-war Reconstruction, which Lincoln had begun to formulate, was also central to his enduring legacy. He sought a policy of reconciliation and healing, emphasizing the importance of bringing the South back into the Union without seeking retribution. Though Lincoln was not able to see his plans for Reconstruction fully realized, his approach served as an ideal that many subsequent leaders tried to emulate, even if the process of Reconstruction proved far more difficult than anticipated. His hope for national healing, based on forgiveness and unity, became a powerful symbol of what the nation could have been had he lived to lead the country through the post-war years. In the years following his death, Lincoln became not only a figure of historical importance, but also a symbol of American resilience. His martyrdom elevated him to a near mythical status. His image was used to inspire generations of Americans, particularly during times of national crisis, such as the two world wars, the civil rights movement, and the Vietnam War. Lincoln became a symbol of unity and perseverance, representing the ideals of liberty and justice for all. The impact of Lincoln's death and the legacy he left behind can be seen in the numerous memorials and monuments erected in his honor. The Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. is one of the most visited sites in the United States, and his likeness appears on the penny, the $5 bill, and countless other symbols of American heritage. Schools, libraries, and institutions across the country bear his name, ensuring that his memory remains a central part of the American consciousness. Ultimately, the death of Abraham Lincoln, while a great tragedy, ensured that his vision for the country would live on far beyond his presidency. His ideals of liberty, equality, and national unity have continued to guide and challenge the nation throughout its history. The lessons he imparted, through his leadership and his words, continue to shape the American experience, reminding the nation of its highest aspirations even in its darkest hours. The impact of Lincoln's assassination on the nation. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln left an indelible mark on the United States, influencing both the immediate aftermath and the long-term course of the nation. It was a traumatic event that triggered a wave of grief, uncertainty, and fear. But in addition to the personal and emotional toll it took on the people of the United States, Lincoln's death also shaped the political and social fabric of the nation for decades to come. One of the immediate effects of Lincoln's assassination was the disruption of the Reconstruction process. Lincoln's vision for a quick and lenient reintegration of the Southern states into the Union was interrupted by his death. Vice President Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, had a vastly different approach. Johnson, a Southern Democrat who had remained loyal to the Union during the Civil War, did not share Lincoln's conciliatory view toward the South. His harsher policies, particularly his vetoes of important civil rights legislation and his opposition to the Freedmen's Bureau, alienated many in the North and contributed to the rise of radical Republicans who sought to impose more stringent terms on the South. The assassination also highlighted the deep divisions that still existed within the United States. Though the Civil War had ended, the underlying issues of race, power, and regionalism had not been resolved. Lincoln's death left the nation grappling with how to reconstruct a society that had been torn apart by the war. The assassination symbolized the fragility of peace and unity, and the challenges of bringing together a nation that had been so deeply divided. Reconstruction, as a result, became a contentious and difficult process, marred by political strife, economic hardship, and racial tensions that would continue well into the 20th century. In addition to its political consequences, Lincoln's death had a profound effect on the social and cultural landscape of the United States. For many, Lincoln's assassination served as a reminder of the fragility of democracy and the potential for violence in political life. The event led to increased security for political leaders and a greater awareness of the dangers of political extremism. Booth's act of violence also raised questions about the limits of dissent and the role of violence in political change, sparking debates that would echo throughout American history. Despite these challenges, Lincoln's assassination ultimately brought the nation closer together in some ways. His death united the people of the North and South in their mourning, transcending political and regional divides. In the aftermath of his death, many Americans saw Lincoln not just as a president, but as a martyr for the Union and for the cause of freedom. This shared sense of loss helped heal some of the wounds of the Civil War, even as the nation struggled to navigate the complexities of Reconstruction. As time passed, Lincoln's legacy only grew stronger. His vision for a united country, his leadership during the war, and his commitment to the principles of liberty and equality became central to American identity. Over the years, his death came to symbolize the end of one era and the beginning of another, a new phase in the nation's development, shaped by the enduring values of freedom and equality for all. In conclusion, Abraham Lincoln's assassination was a pivotal event that not only altered the course of American history in the short term, but also had a lasting impact on the nation's political, social, and cultural landscape. While his death was a tragedy, it ultimately solidified his place as one of the greatest presidents in U.S. history. His leadership, vision, and unwavering dedication to the principles of democracy continue to inspire and guide the country, making his legacy as relevant today as it was in his time. Abraham Lincoln's assassination, occurring so suddenly and tragically at the pinnacle of his presidency, remains one of the most defining moments in American history. It not only took the life of a beloved leader, but also left the country in a state of grief and uncertainty. Yet the impact of that fateful night rippled far beyond the immediate aftermath. Lincoln's leadership during the Civil War and his vision for a post-war nation continue to shape the United States, both in the way it views its past and how it strives toward a more perfect union. His untimely death did not erase his legacy. Instead, it solidified him as a martyr, whose life and ideals are immortalized in the collective memory of the American people. In the years that followed, Lincoln's death prompted critical political and social shifts, from the challenging era of Reconstruction to the eventual realization of civil rights for African Americans. His leadership, characterized by empathy, perseverance, and a commitment to national unity, remains a beacon of hope and strength for future generations. While the pain of Lincoln's loss was profound, his legacy is ultimately one of triumph, a testament to the enduring power of justice, equality, and the American dream. The lessons he imparted during his life and presidency continue to resonate with the nation, reminding us that even in the face of immense hardship, the pursuit of liberty and equality remains a goal worth fighting for.